2019. It's pretty hard on me. So, I'm going into 2020 with an open mind. It wasn't just 2019 that's been hard on me. And that's what today's story is about. Time, pockets of time, the arrangement of things, and their rending and destruction. Now, if I were to start this story with a phrase like "once upon a time," you would think that it was confabulation, and it's not. So I will not. Every single fact I'm about to relate to you is true. And yet this is a tale framed and hung from the rafters of time. So at least that last bit will be making multiple appearances. You can infer the remainder of the phrase from that terminal word, time. Oh, time. It's irregular, erratic, ceaseless, showing up early, showing up late, impossible to get rid of, leaving too soon. It's a lumbering behemoth wielding tailor scissors, perpetually oiled by blood. And while they may fail to sever your silver strand on their first attempt, even their second, eventually your gristle will give way to their torque, even if time's unpredictable tardiness means that there is synchrony with your final heartbeat. In fact, this last bit is a requirement. Time is not done with you until you are done. And there was a time, ages past now, when I held a position you might consider a feat. When I was a child, I would sit in the sunroom with my Aunt Gwyneth while she knitted. She could knit nearly anything. Her work adorned the house. She made items ranging from the practical to the cosmetic. This was a useful skill at home during war. I admired her ability to make so many different items out of the same simple thing. I marveled at it, really. She once made me a small blue donkey. It's not but yarn hide stuffed with yarn innards. Yet this simple creation of hers carried me through countless nightmares, air raid sirens. I tried to help her out when I could. She told me I had the hands of a surgeon. That was wishful thinking on her part. But as it turned out, I did have the hands of a tailor. When I think back on my life, my memories self-arrange into these discrete pockets of time. Between those pockets, haze, non-existence, maybe. I have trouble remembering transitional periods. What got me from one time, job, and place to another. I tend to remember only the substantive events of the period. I see my childhood in two distinct such pockets. My adolescence in one, young adulthood in another. After that, the pockets of time become more irregular, as time and memory are wont to do. You may find this difficult to believe, but I'm not sure how old I am. And were I to guess solely based on the way I look, I'd guess one number, but were I to guess based on the dreams that plague me, or the depth and breadth of the pockets of time that I recall, I would guess a very different number indeed. So I don't think about it too much. It's undoubtedly unhealthy, but such is what I do. In any case, in one of those pockets of time, I worked as a tailor. In addition to the requisite pocket of time was an accompanying pocket of space. And the particular space for this snippet of my life was a small section of Manhattan. I lived and worked in the same building. If I strain, I can recall a few other spots, a restaurant that served soft pork, a hookah bar, a floor covered in plush pillows and throws. But I didn't know the city unless you plopped me down right in front of the building where I worked I couldn't find my way anywhere, and I wasn't much for exploring. At least that is the way that it is in my memory. Like I said before, my memory isn't what it once was, but it's more than it will be, so I'm grateful for that. It's just that I'm unsure who or what to be grateful to. I've always been a nester. Find my place. I make myself as comfortable with it as I can, and I send my tendrils into it, just as it sends its tendrils into me. The further I wander astray, the more I feel I am unraveling, much like Gwyneth's yarn when she would notice a mistake in need of correction. Her creations reminded you in these instances of their tenuous position in this world, as they, without the slightest hint of resistance, reverted back to yarn. Any semblance of previous shape or purpose eradicated with nary a whimper. I tied myself up in the fabric of wear, and it, being itself tied up in me, made it such that neither one of us could easily pull ourselves away from the other. And this was fine, because neither one of us wanted to. After all, one does not aspire to be yarn. You may wonder how I know that a place doesn't want me to leave. I can't give you a satisfactory answer, so you'll have to do with the only answer that I do have, which is that places can live, they can resonate and exert influence just as much as any person. Speaking in that way does display a certain amount of hubris. Who am I to account for the binding agent of the universe, especially when it comes to ascribing it human needs, like wanting? And yet there it is. It's a truth, I feel. Pointless to deny it, and it's a truth that has demonstrated itself to me time and time again. Places can also die. And while there is usually some element of as above, so below at work, it would give residents ample forewarning of their terra firma stitches unraveling, there are occasions when a place dies suddenly, its people remaining wholly oblivious until a new place is birthed from the old. same yarn, same pieces, a new pattern. One day these unfortunates wake up, they look around, and this grim realization dawns with the sun. They no longer feel at home in their world. I myself have several recollective pockets wherein I've tried to visit other pockets merely by returning to the where, since I have no dominion over the when. But these have invariably proven to be demoralizing experiences. Neither of these things means anything without the other. I suppose if you were going to try and make an argument for one way, you'd be better off siding on the side of when mattering far more than where. Because the pattern is what matters. Yarn is yarn. Although it is interesting to note, interesting to me at least, that while attempting to recreate a specific pocket is futile, in doing so, you do create a new pocket. So in that sense, not all is preordained. You may not be able to recreate that which has come and gone, but you can roll the dice anew for as long as you continue to draw breath. You may, if you are lucky, even create something better. Now, I find this thought reassuring, even though it too is ultimately yarn hide and innards. Actually, it's not even real yarn, it's an idea of yarn. And as such, it is perpetually subject to the caprice of the weaver. So I freely admit this is the thinnest of soups. But I've strayed from the story, so let's get back to it. I was in one of these pockets as a tailor, living somewhere in Manhattan. The particular tailors where I worked, W. Shepherd's, is located in a corner building. There was lots of foot traffic. It was 5 stories high, which was squat for Manhattan, even in those days, but it sufficed. The bottom floor was our display room and examples of our work, decorated mannequins. But the floor was sparse. It didn't need to be anything but. Our work and reputation both spoke for themselves. We were the tailor's tailor. We were where all the other tailors came, either to outfit themselves or, just as frequently, when they oversold their abilities to clients and needed to be thrown a lifeline in the form of some decent stitch work. we outfitted high society. Our work was not the flashiest, it was not the most avant-garde, but it was the finest. Certainly in New York, most likely in all of North America, and possibly the world. I enjoyed the work, and I was good at it. In fact, I could hand stitch so well that from time to time I found it incumbent upon myself to throw in an imperfection here and there, just to assure the customer that we weren't using one of those abominable stitching machines. Because Shepherd's was the best, and I was Shepherd's best. I was proud. And that is the third dimension of entanglement. I was entangled in the time, I was entangled in the place, and finally I was entangled in the work. The world is very good at creating situations that, even if they're far from ideal, one would like to keep very much as is, rather than roll the dice again. I wouldn't say I was remunerated well, but I was well respected, and this brought me a great deal of satisfaction. These suits I only did suits. These suits I crafted adorned the shoulders, chests, backs, and arms of the most important men in the city. They all relied on me to make them exist in the way that they wanted to. They were all very specific. As you might guess, these were not clients who were easy to satisfy. They're demanding, they were exacting. Yet the power dynamic was such that they never stepped over the line into disrespect. After all, only we could provide them with that which they truly desired. I often worked late into the night, but it didn't really matter. Our hours could be irregular as long as our suits weren't. I can remember fretting about making deadlines. But it's amusing, and a lesson I've learned several times over since. What seemed so important to me at the time, enough to make me suffer, means less than nothing now. I'm not sure how many times I had to experience the ephemeral nature of all importance until it finally made its way into my harrowed skull. But eventually it did. And I am hoping you, friend, the least amount of suffering you need for it to resonate with you too. Because life becomes a much simpler affair afterwards. This is not the same as saying you shouldn't care about your work or do your best. Of course you should. At least that's my belief. In fact, this is one of the tenets that allows you the dimension of entanglement you need to feel of the universe rather than just in the universe. The key is to endeavor to maintain some perspective, lest you court madness in an attempt to stave it off. I must have made over 100 suits, jacket, vest, pants, during my tenure at W. Shepherd's. Seersucker, wool, silk, cotton, sometimes all in one. Each and every finished product was an extension of each client and their specifications. And each client was, so I believed at the time, a person. But all pockets are of fixed and finite depth, and my tenure at W. Shepherd's came to an end in a most abrupt, unexpected, and traumatic manner. My last day in their employ, and in fact, my last day working as a tailor at W. Shepherd's or anywhere, I was serving as the lone shop minder. This was an indignity that even the master tailors had to endure from time to time when needs conspired. There were still one or two others working the seams, but there had been a rather extravagant gala event the previous week. Lots of orders, lots of work, lots of exhaustion. So most were in the recuperative environments of their own dwellings. And of these places existing as they did well outside my purview, I knew nothing. I can remember the previous night was particularly humid. I had a bad time of it. It was always humid in New York in the summer. But this night, I can remember falling asleep, sweating and hot, and waking up in the middle of the night, shivering and cold again and again. The sweat evaporating from my skin just in time to be replaced by a newly glistening sheen. Come morning, my bed sheets were drenched in this salted effluvia. I thought, surely I must be getting ill. Yet, after being awake for a short time, I found that I suffered no lingering ill effects. I don't remember anything unusual about that day at all. It was a weekday. I'd get the occasional foot traffic from potential clients, or more likely representatives for potential clients, like professional shoppers, factotums, and the like. My recollection is that we had an absolutely typical number of absolutely typical customers that day, and once I was over my morning grogginess, my fettle was as fine as it had ever been. When it did at last come time to close up shop, I did so with all the usual meticulous care I take in all things. And this is a trait that favors my success in most occupations. I get lost in the process, the minutiae, collecting receipts, marking down measurements, making notes on orders. All of it was unremarkable. It was only when I went to lock the front door that I noticed something amiss. And there was this. The streetlights on our block had yet to be lit. The lamplighter had not yet come. Now, W. Shepherd's, while of excellent repute, had originally established itself in a neighborhood which had since fallen on bleak times. It was unwise to walk the proximate byways and alleyways alone after dark. There had been a lot of talk of moving shop, but talk, at least up until such time when I departed, was all that it was. I had worked enough nights in the storefront to know our lamplighter had a routine, a standard route through the city. The streets were illuminated with astonishing regularity, yet on this night it was well past the time when our lamps were typically flickering. Fragile, yes, but still effective, casting their protective glow a few meters around each post, creating islands of light surrounded by tenebrous darkness before the next lamp took the illuminative baton and began defining its own glowing, sheltering shore. In and of itself, this was unusual, and yet it was merely the first of a series of remarkable events at the end of an unremarkable day. The front door of our shop had a thick, leaded glass pane comprising a third of its surface. It was not frosted, it was not textured, it was just heavy, weathered glass, and it made anything seen through it appear slightly out of focus. The lights were on inside the shop, the outside lane and pavement dark. This additional circumstance, shop lights reflecting and refracting off the inside surface of the glass like moonlight off a rippling pool, served to compound the problem. That is to say, it was hard to see outside. And yet I could just make out something through the distortions and reflections that gave me pause. It appeared to be a ragged mound of great height, of a material I could not divine. It was lacking in homogeny. It was a pastiche of different colors and textures, at least as far as I could tell in the dim. And it loomed just outside the door. And while I couldn't make out details, I could discern that this mass was at least the height of 2 full-grown men, and its base perhaps as wide around as a stone well. It took up the majority of the entryway, and if the shop door had not opened inwards, it would have blocked egress entirely. The mound was unmoving, but in the wind its edges flitted about in the same way certain breeds of fur might. As I moved to put my face up to the glass, in the hopes of getting a better view of this disturbing shape. The signal bell jangled, as though the shop door had been quite violently slammed. I jerked back in alarm. The mound still had not moved, but the darkness around it appeared somehow darker, and behind it, a shade casting its own shadow, even darker still. I craned my head to peer down either side of the lane. I was hoping for some evidence of typical evening activity that might assuage the growing sense of dread within me. Perhaps even the presence of the now unacceptably tardy lamplighter himself. There was nary a soul to be found. And inside, the store itself had gone disquietingly quiet. I lifted a hand to stroke my beard. It's a nervous habit I have yet to break. And when I did so, I found it shaking uncontrollably. I steadied the offending hand, concluded I was being preposterous. There were plenty of quiet evenings to be experienced, plenty of obstacles that might delay a lamplighter, and plenty of wind gusts as might spontaneously ring a spring door bell. Those explained that left only the mound on the stoop unexplained, and it being immobile as it were. Why did I dread it so? Fear and frustration curdled within me into a sort of impotent anger. There was nothing for it but to grab a candle from atop a display case, step outside and confront this aberration, this chromatic nothing, this idea that was only a threat when left to run roughshod across the fertile fields of my own imagination. I took a lit candle in one hand. While doing so, I noticed a long pair of tailor's scissors lying askew, their near razor-sharp blades glinting in the candlelight. So I took them as well, but only, I told myself, because it was better to be safe than sorry. I was not so full of fear as to think I would be doing battle on the stoop of the most prestigious tailors in all of Manhattan, possibly the world. So I strode to the door, pulled it inwards while keeping my eyes on the ground directly in front of me, and I stepped outside. Rather boldly, I thought. The door slammed behind me, and the spring bell jangled again, although notably not so loudly as it had the first time. My eyes at this point were fixed on my own feet, and I with some effort bade them look up to confront the undefined, unnerving mass mere inches from my nose. At first, it was difficult to understand exactly what I was seeing, but as my eyes scanned higher, Reaching the top of the mound, I comprehended it for what it was. It seemed my own grim realization came not with the dawn, but with the dark. For there was every jacket, every vest, and every pair of pants I had ever stitched were here piled in front of me. The suits which I imagined adorning the bodies of New World nobility here, weathering, moldering, stinking of decay. It was as if the moment any one of my clients exited W. Shepherd's wearing one of my vestments, the door slammed shut behind them. The spring bell tolled, and they were physically enraptured unto heaven, leaving behind these exquisitely crafted shells into which I had poured so much of the substance of my own life. I had this idea, but of course it was impossible. The mound had not been there an hour ago when I swept the stoop. Impossible. Was there a hole in my pocket? Did this thing seek to rend me from my entanglements? How could it mock me so? And how could I allow it? I shuffled around what was now essentially a pile of dirty laundry, never taking my eyes from it. And I left. Walking down dangerous streets, heedless of my own welfare, barely noticing the lamplighter motionless, lying in a pool of his own blood in the street, a block away. I determined that I could never return to W. Shepherd's. My pocket had collapsed. My life as a tailor was a sham of the worst kind, filled with figmentary clients, ridiculing my efforts as they dissipated on the breeze. Newspaper reports were later to claim the lamplighter was stabbed in the stomach with a razor-sharp pair of tailor's scissors. But newspapers, too, are mere figments, prone to float away on the slightest breeze. I think perhaps I'm living the same life over and over again. Nothing changing but the skin. Maybe one day I'll choose to cease participating in this ramshackle mess of pockets and transitions. If I drink enough, the dreams do not come. Or maybe they simply fall through the cracks of my subconscious. I can never recall the transitions between being awake and being asleep. I usually remember getting into bed, but nothing after, and often I will wake up in some foreign place, my body somehow roused well before my mind. And who can say what I get up to in those wee hours? Who can say if we exist in pockets or as pockets? the more closely I look at the similarities between the cycle of sleep and wakefulness and the larger pockets of time demarcating my life as a whole, the more I think about who or what may dwell in the gaps between the pockets. The yarn unravels. The mask falls to the floor. And I am left to doubt and wonder. And wonder. And wonder. And wonder why I wonder. Then surely have another. So the questions run for cover. What better time, what better place, what better job to work the seam? Yea, slimy things did crawl with legs upon a slimy sea. Happy New Year. I'm very excited for what comes next.